Okay, awesome. I think we could start now. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody joining us from various parts of the world. And welcome to our second webinar, Transforming Sponsorships in the sports through digital innovation. And we're glad you all could join us. And as you can see from your screen, we have a star-studded panel, and it's my duty to introduce the panel to you first before we start off. So first, we have Steve Lacroix. He's the EVP and CMO of Minnesota Vikings Football Club. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Awesome. Why don't you introduce yourself, Steve, in terms of what you've been doing and what's your background like?
Yeah, this will be my 20th season with the Vikings. Obviously, the most unique offseason of the 20, based on the world we're in right now. I spent 10 years with the Indiana Pacers before moving to Minnesota. So I had the blessing of building a new NBA arena and then a new NFL venue, and then into our new world-class headquarters in Eagan, Minnesota, which is on a 200-acre campus. And I've had the privilege of dealing with a lot of great partners over the years. So I look forward to the discussion today and having some fun over the next hour.
Lovely to hear from you, Steve. Cool. Up next, we have Blake Davidson, and Blake has his own company called Game 7 Partners, and he has a rich history and background of working in the sports industry. Particularly interesting about his stint with NASCAR. So Blake, welcome on board. Up to you now.
All right, thanks, Vinu. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I started my own group last year, Game 7 Partners, G7P. But prior to that, I was at NASCAR for more than 20 years, running a number of different businesses, most recently the Consumer Innovation Group, prior to that, the merchandising licensing space, and started kind of all the gaming efforts at NASCAR, including eSports, and before it was really a term, way back when, and brokered the partnership with iRacing, which has been in the news quite a bit lately during the shutdown of sports when NASCAR migrated onto to really that digital platform that kept them very relevant. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Looking forward to hearing from you more. And then we have Steve Busby. So this is interesting, Steve, because you are from the eSports side, and that kind of brings a lot of context to this discussion as well, because that's a really upcoming trend, and I think that's something which we are really looking forward to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here and appreciate you guys making the time to have me. I will say the esports space has, oddly been deeply impacted in that it's grown actually quite a bit during all of this. So, our lives are busier than they've ever been in the past, and they were already pretty busy. So, esports, I think, as an industry is just going to have a lot of statements to make in the next year. And we've kind of been out there on a crusade over the last 2 or 3 in particular, trying to help brands enter the space and stay in the space. We think there's now more than ever going to be more brands rushing in and then subsequently leaving because they don't activate the right way and resonate with the esports and gaming audience. So that's what we're really effectively here to do is to help brands resonate in a meaningful way and connect with the fan base and the gaming community.
Interesting. Lovely. Awesome. So last but not the least, Satish and Arvind, they are from Finis Co, co-founders, CEO and CBDO. Satish, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Vinu. Good morning, everyone. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Finis Co. Finis Co is a fan engagement and analytics company. We help sports organizations drive digital transformation with fan engagement, sponsorship activations. Everything was digital. Interestingly, that has been our message even before COVID was. So interestingly, COVID is going to change the whole discussion when we have with the sports organizations and the brands and other sponsors. Digital is kind of the way to go. Digital is a new avenue for all this sports organizations to build the loyalty, the next generation fans. So that's where we are pretty excited to be helping out in that space.
Interesting. Arvind.
Sure. Thanks, Venu, Satish, and welcome to all the speakers. It's going to be an interesting conversation. So a little bit about myself. My name is Arvind Sampath, and I'm one of the co-founders and chief business officer of Finis Co. I basically lead all of our business development operations and strategic partnerships initiatives. So this one is pretty close to me. I'm very excited about this topic. There's been a lot of things that has been happening in the sponsorship world, and also from the teams and the leagues standpoint as well. So this is going to be a very good conversation. And this is our second webinar, and excited to kickstart this one.
Awesome. So, yep, without further ado, I think we'll probably run to the panel discussion because that's what we're here for. So I'll just stop sharing the screen and I'll put everybody on the grid view so that we could see everyone. Okay, interesting. Awesome. So Steve Lacroix, I'll start with you. And this is an interesting question, which we would love to hear from you from a team standpoint. So, how has COVID-19 impacted the traditional sponsorship model, in terms of revenue losses or questions on ROI going forward, or, the expectation that traditional sponsorship will continue in the new normal or poised for innovation by going digital?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's put a lot of financial strain on teams. In our case, our season hasn't started yet, so we're not in the point where any benefits are necessarily missing. We had to get really creative around NFL draft weekend and go fully virtual and digital for that major event in our off season. And it's really a matter of trying to project what your financials are going to be, what our partner is going to request as either a credit carried forward or a refund if certain benefits cannot be delivered. The term substitute benefits is used almost daily as far as how we can, our next challenge is training camp. Are we going to have fans at training camp? And if we don't have fans at training camp, that impacts the exposure that our partners get that activate on our campus during those couple weeks. So it's an interesting time, and we're just trying to be as transparent and candid with our partners. And a lot of things we just don't know yet. We don't know the destiny of our season. The schedule is out, but no games have been postponed at this point or delayed. So we're full go towards an NFL season as planned.
Interesting. Awesome. So, we have an audience questions for Steve Busby, and this is interesting because, it's concerned with eSports. So it says, does digital sports sponsorship extend to eSport audiences that enjoy both forms of entertainment?
Yeah, I think they're really overlapping right now. I mean, the strategy has to be holistic. You can't simply, eSports is unique. I think a lot of the traditional sponsorship model doesn't necessarily lend itself to esports and gaming. It's one that requires a really interesting take in so much as you've got to connect with the audience more than just kind of a logo or a push to coupon. It's got to be you got to have a social media strategy backing it up that's interacting with these fan points, interacting with them in a chat format live during the event. It's just multifaceted, so it kind of encompasses both. And I know that's not the best answer, but I could have drone on for 20 minutes if I'm not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, Blake, you also had some point to add for this question, particularly, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, well, just sort of being around that world and more so over the last year, but having been kind of on all sides of it from a league perspective and working with the properties, I think Steve made a great point there that there are a lot of brands that have gotten into it and quickly realized they didn't understand the landscape, which is understandable. It's been kind of the wild, wild west. And if you don't know the space and if you're not kind of endemic to it, it's confusing. And there's so many different entry points. And there are people that are willing to take your money, lots of them. But that doesn't mean that you should be spending your money in those places. There's obviously the leagues themselves, the publishers, the influencers, the gamers, the streaming services. There's so many different entry points there. So finding a good fit, and there is a relevant fit for a lot of brands, but there's people that can kind of help them in the space. And one thing I've seen, if you're just sort of, I'd call kind of logo slapping or getting involved without being authentic to the space, then it's not going to work. So you've got to figure out a way to have an authentic entry point engagement and then build from there. And a lot of brands missed on that.
Interesting. I mean, so Steve Lacroix, I had a question. Is there, a bit of, a fear amongst the traditional sports model that, a lot of those fans might be switching over to esports, because of this pandemic, and, and your fan base might be kind of getting less in that aspect?
Well, obviously the demographic for esports is different than NFL in a lot of cases. I'd say in most cases, and what we work really hard on, and frankly, what worries me a bit for the future person in my chair is how do you attract that younger season ticket member in a normal season? We want that stadium full, and you have to commit multiple hours of your Sunday to travel to the stadium to be there. Hopefully, you're there early to enjoy the activities and stay for the whole game and head home. And so that's a time commitment. And so the younger generation just is something that we're working on. How can we engage them? And our owners bought a Call of Duty team, so we're really close to esports as well. It's a separate operation, but we're related, so to speak. And so we're trying to share different things back and forth and see how they are modeling their sponsorships and their fan engagement, and how we can apply that to our fan base that may be similar in some cases.
Interesting. Okay, Blake, a question for you. Is digital innovation in sponsorship a responsibility of the organizations or the sponsors? And how do teams and sponsors create a win-win scenario in this new normal world?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there is a bit of a paradigm shift right now. You've got a lot of the leagues and the properties themselves have been forced to scale back. So a lot of the creativity, coming from those groups, is not in play today. So you've really, if you're going to engage, if you're a sponsor, my feeling is you've really got to take that into your own hands. And so whether that's, through agencies you're working with, or, if you have the in-house capability, that's great, but most don't. There's a lot of talent out there that can help, but I think kind of the sponsor driving the relevant integration at this point is really critical, because, you're probably not getting the resources from some of these properties that you may have had in the past. And even if you were, I think, putting together a program that will hit all of your objectives and deliver what you're looking to deliver, and then bringing that to the properties, really being aggressive and proactive in that approach, I think makes a lot of sense. So I do think there's going to be a shift on where the ideas are coming from. I think the sponsors and the brands that are taking an aggressive approach to that today are the ones that are going to come out ahead.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this question was really, really interesting. And I mean, the times coming forward, now it's it's kind of, like you said, it's interesting to see how these brands react versus how the sponsors react, and, what kind of an environment is created in this scenario. So yeah, that's interesting to see.
One more point to add on that, Venu, is the third element, and that is the fans, right? So what do the fans want, right? So how do the fans engage with the sports and the brand? And that commonality also plays a big role in deciding that and how it's going to transform in future.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment on one thing that Steve was saying when you asked him if he was worried at all that his fan base may be declining because people are going to transition towards esports and gaming. I don't see that at all. I mean, the product of the NFL is fantastic. They're not going to lose viewership. If anything, people need sports now more than ever. I think it's just going to be a case where adapting and what the Minnesota organizations are doing with the development of the rocker is as a team in the Call of Duty League is a really good move. And it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt for esports. It's not a situation where I think they'll lose audience to esports. It's just, what are they going to do to pivot and provide that kind of fan package for their already existing fan base and gain new fans in doing so, because there will be a lot of people that I don't think you historically could reach with traditional sports that you're going to reach via that esports demographic.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. Agree. Awesome. So, the next question is for Satish. And so it's a slightly longer question, Satish, so hear me out. In a recent Edelman survey, 71% of the consumers said that brands and companies that place profits over people would lose their trust forever. With the pandemic and the other things going on in the world right now, how can digital change the way for sponsors and sports organizations to build the goodwill of fans?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, right? So we live in an era of where any ordinary citizen can be a publisher, right? So everybody has a platform. The social media has become the platform to raise their opinion. So it's going to be extremely interesting to watch how what comes out of this, right? Because in a traditional sports, when people come to the stadium, people buy different tickets in different stands. But with digital, everybody gets the same experience. So how can you charge one person over the other person, right? And how the personalized interaction of these sponsors coming into the digital picture, as well as going to change the way fans are going to absorb and experience sports. So I believe that a couple of points there. One is fans would love. I think sports has always been an emotional connection for fans. More than anything, they want to stay connected with the sports teams, and these digital sponsorships or activations cannot interfere in their experience, how they enjoy the sports. And also, in a traditional sports, a billboard is watched by everybody, right, from a 5-year-old to a 70-year-old. But how are you going to make it personalized in a digital world, right? So all these things are going to have a huge impact in building that loyalty going forward. I wouldn't be surprised if fans are going to be kind of getting opinionated more with how things are going to change post-COVID.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you spoke about the non-intrusive part of it as well in terms of viewing the content. So that's something quite interesting, right? Okay. One for Arvind. How do you think sponsors will react to COVID and other alternatives for sponsors? Let us stick to that. Okay, yeah. So that's the question. Yeah. How do you think that sponsors will react to COVID and other alternatives for sponsors?
Perfect. Yeah, a great question. So I believe planning and prioritization is probably what that has been happening. I mean, to be frank, it's already happened, right? There is a lot of prioritization around. Hey, from the sponsor's view, let's take a stock of the existing projects that they've been on, right? And there's going to be a lot of strategies around. Hey, can I put certain projects on hold? Right, or some of the sponsors might be looking at, hey, can we go and have a dialogue with the teams or the sporting organizations that they've been working with to figure out if they can change certain contractual terms and obligations, right? And frankly, for some of the sponsors, it could very well mean that they are going to cancel some of their existing obligations. I certainly believe that, as Steve Busby pointed out, right, there has to be a balance. Right. Some of these decisions or extremes from my perspective, even though I understand that survival is one aspect of how these decisions are made, but the balance has to be there. Right. As an example, if a sponsor who is working with a big professional team, they are going to cut ties with them. Right. Then you've got their competitors, right, vying for the spot. Right, then it becomes the question of, hey, am I going to lose that long-term value? Right, so there has to be a balance from my perspective. And the second point, I think Steve, Blake, and everybody pointed out was, hey, the sponsors are going to think about the alternate options. Right, they're going to research a lot. Right, understand more around say what sort of ROI that the alternate options could bring them. So there is going to be a ton of research activities, and frankly, we've seen some of those alternate options happen already. Some of the big brands are working with different agencies, right, and coming up with new creative ways around it. So there's going to be a lot of shaking that's going to happen within how the sponsors invest moving forward and how they're going to divert or reallocate funds.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like you said, these are kind of uncertain times, and it's I mean, it's kind of interesting to see what's coming up in the future in terms of how sponsors and teams are going to react. So yeah, so we have an audience question here, and I think this is an open for all. But maybe Steve Lacroix, you can go first since it's connected with specifically football. So we see a lot of logo slapping on TV with various football leagues after COVID. Is it effective if it is on live TV, or advertisements before or after the match are more effective?
I would think that live TV is when the fans are most engaged. I think part of the challenge with what we've seen with these empty stadiums is that it's live sports, which is everybody's hungry for, but it just doesn't quite have that same excitement and energy. And you're starting to see leagues pump in crowd noise through the broadcast production. And so we've always thought and believed in, and I've always thought and believed in that full stadiums create a better viewer experience for those at home. It makes you want to be there, be part of it. And so the play on the field is still top quality as return to play happens, but it's just one of those where it just feels a little sterile. And so how can you make that home viewing experience still, once everybody gets settled into live sports being in the norm again, how do you try to duplicate what it was before with energy, excitement, engagement for fans watching?
Interesting. Okay, a couple of other questions as well. How do you see scope of receiving and budget allotted for sponsorship in these times? So, do you want to take that, Blake?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I think obviously everyone has had to prioritize their businesses, and there are certain businesses that are doing very well right now, and others that are not, and clearly sponsorship can become a discretionary item when you're focused with so many other critical challenges inside your company. So I think, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, I think those that have been more proactive and have the strategy and just a little bit more astute at figuring out where there's some relevant fits and ways that they can stay top of mind and engage with properties right now that are certainly very relevant. I think those are the ones that have allocated money or shifted monies away from various properties. Steve L is in a great position in the NFL. As he said at the outset here, is their season hasn't started, and the NFL's been great about really putting a message out there that we're continuing forward. They really haven't altered their strategy, where you've got others, if you're a sponsor or brand and you're tied to baseball right now, what are you thinking, right? There's hard to tell when that's going to come online. There was some hope that basketball was going to come quicker, and the NBA, now there's some doubt around that and when they'll start. So, if you put kind of all of your eggs in those baskets, you've got the budgets that are allocated for those things, then maybe you can shift those. Certainly if there's not a season, you'll have an opportunity to do that. Others are cutting and they're not coming back, just like there's certain fans that are going to change their behavior for good, that aren't going to come out anymore. So, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag depending on where you're at, but I think you do have to be very flexible right now and shift accordingly if you're going to stay in the game.
Interesting. In fact, on that, sorry, you had something to say, Satish?
Yeah, I was thinking that probably it's going to open up. Typically there is only a handful of sponsors every team has, right? I'm guessing it could be because of like the entry barrier or whatever, right? So maybe this might open up more local sponsors or more smaller sponsors to come in. And I'm guessing the teams and leagues might be thinking to innovate in a different direction on how do we accommodate the sponsors of varying kinds, right? Even a smaller local retailer might be able to be accommodated in the sponsorship model, right? So it could open up. I'm thinking more on the positive side. It could open up more sponsors to come in, right? So that would help the teams kind of navigate this uncertain times.
That brings up a really interesting point that I'd like to comment on. I mean, I can't speak so much to traditional sports, but at the beginning of COVID, there was a lot of pullback from brands that were scared, and we had some deals go backwards, which was understandable. and we were very sympathetic to, but it allowed this massive opportunity across the industry where there was really good events. I mean, the strength of esports is digital, right? The live audience, even when you sell out half a stadium, seems small compared to the online viewership. So, there's still tremendous opportunity in kind of owning that platform. So we actually took the bull by the horns a little bit there when this was getting going, and connected with some of those brands that were just looking to tap into esports for the first time. And I was like, now's as good a time as you'll ever get to get assets that should be worth, $250,000. You could probably get in for the same thing for $50,000 to $100,000. So there really still is a lot of opportunities like that for brands looking to enter the space in the right places. And that's where, as a company, Rebel's been able to make some headway during this. Is if we pre-COVID were developing our consulting channels and trying to find, Fortune 500 brands that were looking to enter the space and helping guide them with our 10 years of experience. And ultimately we decided at the start of COVID, we were like, we're just going to do it for free because nobody knows what they're doing right now and everybody's scared. Let's just try to help and be a partner. And I would also say, for the brands that are kind of going in that direction in particular, that, we're either giving you a discount off of your car insurance. I think Progressive was doing a program like that they were very vocal about. People that are leaning into it and actually genuinely helping rather than capitalizing off of the message that's out there. I think there is a distinct difference, and maybe that's a whole nother discussion point, but the brands that are actually legitimately putting their money where their mouth is and lending a helping hand, I think are doing it right during all this.
Interesting. Yep, makes sense. Okay, so Blake, I had a question for you. So okay, just one second. Yeah. So what alternatives sponsors can explore with no live events or fanless sporting events? And esports, direct usage of pro athletes or fan experience. So these are some examples. So what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about esports, and I do think there's opportunity there, and an opportunity that is not so far afield from maybe what some of these brands and sponsors have been doing. The audience is attractive but different, and at the end of the day, they're fans. And I think fans are fans. They may have different demographics and psychographics and all those, but they're fans, and they have an affinity. So you can tap into that affinity, and I think that's important. We are fortunately seeing some live sports come back. So I think there are opportunities that are out there. That doesn't mean that every brand or sponsor should just dive into whatever those properties are. I think you've really got to, analyze and scrutinize those properties and see if there's a fit there. But I do think it's an opportunity to do things a little bit differently. And Satish, said, I think there is going to be a bit of a change in the landscape from a sponsor standpoint and who's participating in what. And there's a lot of scrutiny on sponsor spending and brand spending right now too, which could open the doors. And it goes both ways. You've got various properties, particularly in the collegiate space, that are going to have to be very careful and sensitive about the types of properties and brands that they're partnering with. And so what does that look like going forward? Will all of those partnerships come back when those sports are kind of back online? It remains to be seen. So, I do think that there are alternatives out there, but just because there's an alternative or there's a live event or some other avenue doesn't mean that it's a smart strategy. So I think really relying on expertise and getting informed opinions about those different properties and opportunities is the most important thing right now.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and I would like to add a couple of points. And from Blake's perspective, yes, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny, right? I think there's going to be a lot of research done to understand, say, what sort of value that some of these alternate options are going to bring forth from the sponsor's perspective. But purely from assessing, say, the kind of opportunities that they have, right? Again, we've seen certain things happen with the European soccer, right, where brands are directly collaborating with the soccer stars, right, and creating video series and promoting their brands onto the different social media platforms. So, I mean, it's not something which is new, right? But these sponsors and brands are working to create some unique experiences, right? Directly collaborating with those stars, right? And to be honest with you, some of the big stars, right, they have a huge fan following. And sometimes it's even bigger than what the teams and the other sporting organizations that they've been part or they've been representing, right? So there will be a market where now the sponsors will basically look to having those direct interactions, right? Purely from creating those experiences, right? In a different way. From what that they've done before. So that's something that we're going to see more and more happen. And also, like, from the fans' perspective, right? If you look at it, the brands will focus more around, hey, how technologies can help them, right? And having that direct conversation with the fans, right? And whether it's gamifying those experiences, right? In providing certain elements to the fans directly, right? Or they sort of work with some of the technology partners that they've been associated with, and create those unique activations specifically geared to the fans to improve the brand value. So these are some of the things that I can see, at least the sponsors will be laying the foundation and figuring out if those are certain things that will provide the brand value, right, from a long-term standpoint.
Vinu, can I add one other thing there?
Sure.
Yeah. So the other, thought I had in all of this is that this is also a time, I think, if you're on the league or the property side, that you don't have to be as locked in and married to your rate card, which a lot of leagues are. It's all about, this is what we charge, this is what our packages look like. When there are many kind of non-endemic brands, the traditional sports world, that would bring a different audience with them. And Steve B certainly lives this every single day, and seeing a lot of those brands in the esports and the gaming space that aren't maybe participating in the traditional sports space. But if there's an opportunity to reach out to some of those different brands that maybe haven't traditionally played because they just haven't had the budgets, or because you've had these rate cards that are just way off the charts for where they may be willing to spend, or doesn't make sense. But if you can find some of these, get creative around what those partnerships look like to attract a unique, different audience, then I think it's not all about the dollars. It's about other value that they can bring to the table, which will help you. And I think about this digital tether that you have to maintain with your fan base, and as you bring new fans. So if you can do that in the right way, get creative, then you can really change, the way you're doing business, and build the future fan base, and build that digital tether with your fans going forward, which is really critical.
Absolutely. I think you answered one of the audience questions, which I was about to ask you next, which is, he asked that, would you be willing to make significant concessions during the pandemic time to sponsors, lower fees, more assets, to maintain long-term partnerships? And when do we see a return to normalcy? Give a little now to get a little more down the road. So I think that's pretty much on the same lines that you spoke about.
Sure.
And I'll jump in there. I mean, a lot of our deals are long-term, our naming rights, our founding partners. And so we have to do what's right for the long-term partnership. What that means will be a one-on-one discussion with each partner. Each is in a different situation as far as their business and their needs, or maybe their pivot of what they are transitioning to as a brand or as a product. So you just have to sit down and work it out. And it's a long road. And we know that this is going to be a very unique season for us, most likely, even though we're planning on normalcy. That it's still going to be some twists and turns, and we know we have many years ahead with a lot of our key partners. So we'll land in the right spot.
So, Steve, in that regard, are your existing partners sitting, bringing those discussions, like, to see what else you can do? Or, even though the NFL hasn't said any changes to the season, but are they partners coming in and talking about alternatives or anything like that?
Yeah, it depends. Obviously, around NFL draft that I mentioned, we had to get very creative and shift some folks into more digital platforms, whether it was our digital happy hour with our draft picks, or our GM talking to our corporate partners after after the event digitally versus inviting them into the facility, indoor draft room. So it's one of those where, training camp's up next and the season will be after that. So each partner is at a different stage as far as where we've discussed. And a lot of it is at this point, we just don't know anything different. We don't know when training camp's going to start yet. We know when our first game is scheduled and whether that continues, we'll see. But I mean, it's just one of those where we're just trying to keep in touch, be open and honest with them, and at times admit that we just don't know anything different at this point.
Yep.
I have one question that I think will contribute to the dialogue here for Steve. Steve, when you're looking at effectively a season that could potentially have no fans in the stands, the home and away concept becomes really interesting, right? And I'm sure digitally, when watching on TV, you can still get that impact and same experience. Like you could create that fairly easily, what crowd noise would sound like. But what about for the players in the stadium? Have you found anything that you could potentially leverage from a partnership perspective there for a brand like a JBL or Bose, because they're a league partner rather, creating in-stadium fan noise where your fans that are watching maybe digitally can actually, as they're cheering, it like impacts the noise in the stadium. That's the one part that I've been so curious about when thinking about the NFL and what that could look like.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. A lot of those technologies are being discussed at the league level. The league, I'm assuming, would want to keep it equal across all 32 clubs, and I'm not sure if it would be fair for one team to be able to use one technology, and maybe another team couldn't. But there's some cool things out there, some really neat products that could engage that fan base at home and relay that into the stadium, and then how do you tie partnership around that? But it sounds like we should have all that figured out by now, but we don't. But in the coming weeks, I think we'll know a lot more of what we're allowed to do from a league perspective, what shared technologies, the power of 32 teams working together to approach certain technologies could be obviously better financially for each team versus everybody kind of negotiating their own deal. So it'd be interesting to see where that all lands.
Yeah.
Interesting. In fact, on the same note, we have an interesting question from the audience, and probably it's open to the panel. Maybe Satish, you could go first, being from a technology side. For more old school organizations that have not fully embraced the digital platform, what would the panelists recommend for those teams that want to get more involved?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting question, right? I think sports, at least from being a business side, right? We have seen sports organizations focus more on operations, right? Because that's their bread and butter, and that's a heavy duty thing, line item for them. And digital has always been, nice to have or a lower priority thing. And if at all, when you say digital, most of them would be on, social media, right? Like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and all. But now it kind of changes, right? What it leaves them with is they have no clue about who the digital fans are. How do you reach out to them? How do you interact with them, right? So that's a big gap. So probably, our recommendation has always been that you cannot boil the ocean in the first go. You have to start incrementally. So build that digital infrastructure first. It could be kind of like enhancing your website or, and then coming up with a mobile app or whatever, and adding, like an interactive experience for fans rather than just having a one-way news type content, right? So that is all, people can get it anywhere, right? So how do you interact with your fans and thereby build that relationship and slowly start introducing as you, go along the maturity curve on the digital side. So even I mean, the good thing with digital is it gives you a flexibility to trial and error quickly. All right, you can, because there's always this cultural aspect in different sports. For example, in a European sport such as rugby, people hate interrupted in the middle. But here in NFL, there's like so many interruptions and there's a commercial break and things like that happening. But rugby or soccer, people hate to get interrupted. So how do you, figure out that cultural aspect of what fan needs? So digital helps you to do the trial and error, beta testing or whatever quickly, the experiences that will go viral, which, fan doesn't like. So it helps you to, if you start slow and keep building it, keep innovating, and willing to innovate is also the key. What we've also seen is, even from a sponsor standpoint, teams and leagues that are willing to innovate digitally are able to build that relationship with the younger generation fans, and those are your future fans, right?
Yeah.
So it helps to build that loyalty going forward too.
And Vinu, on that, kind of building on that, the one thing I've seen that there are a lot of groups and organizations out there, as Satish says, I love that line about boiling the ocean, but they feel like they have to spend so much money to get involved and to activate digitally, and they don't. There are a lot of cost-effective solutions out there, and so that scares a lot of people off. It's just that intimidation factor of one, just assuming that it's going to cost just tons of money to go and activate digitally. That's not always the case. And then the other thing I would say is that all of these organizations have assets, and they may not have tapped into those assets before, and they may have even been sort of off limits, that no, we're not going to do certain things because we've never done that before. Well, now's the time to change your thinking on some of those things, and maybe you let people in a different way, and you can activate around that digitally, which you'd have to do to take advantage of that. So, I think it's assessing the assets that you have, kind of going through your organization, finding what would be interesting to your fan base, or interesting content. There's content, there's assets, there's all of those things. And then I think leveraging that in a digital way, which you have to today, and understanding that, there's a budget for everyone. So, whether you have 100 people a month that are coming, to your site or your mobile app and looking for content, or if you've got 10,000 or 100,000 or 1 million people, it's all scalable. And that's the thing that people need to understand as they get involved, and just ask the right questions, engage with the right people, because there's a way to do it in a really cost-effective manner.
Yeah, I think it's more like a change management issue, if I could say so. It's like, being scared to change or being scared to do something different. But now, it's because of COVID, it's time that, everybody's getting onto a forced change, right? So it's something that nobody could foresee. And it's kind of pushing the limits and, saying that now you have to do this. There's no other way, no way to look back, right? So that kind of sums up your point.
Yeah, and quickly adding one more point, right? So what especially the COVID-19 pandemic, what has it done, right? It has level the playing field for everyone, right? Now, I think traditionally, if you look at it, digital has been in the minds of some of the innovating clubs or sports organizations, but predominantly, right, more than 60-70% of them, right, they do not have the underlying proper infrastructure in place, right? But with COVID-19, what has happened is it has basically leveled that playing field. So now, if you look at it from the sports organization standpoint, and also from sponsors' perspective, right? So everybody is like scrambling around to figure out, say, hey, what is it, right? What is it, one or two different things that we can do, right, to make sure that we are marching forward, right? So again, to Blake's point, a lot of the times digital has basically scared even some of the bigger organizations, right? But I think there is enough education and maturity that is happening in the industry in itself, right? Where now the teams, the sponsors, are basically listening to some of some of the technology folks, right? That are putting together a good package, right, for them to utilize, and basically getting that message that, hey, there are things that can happen, right, in a cost-effective manner.
This is going to be a really interesting time right now, because right in line with what everybody's saying, the Band-Aid's been ripped off. Okay, the computer age is now. We're officially moved on into the next generation, and it presents some really interesting psychological nuances, right? And I think what's going to be good for sports is, as I said before, I think people are going to need sports more than ever right now to have a sense of normalcy, because our kids, our families, they're going to grow up behind a computer screen right now, at least even for the next year. School as we know it is not going to be the same thing. And with the rise of esports and gaming, it's going to be really interesting to see how that impacts personal development and interpersonal skills. So I think, sports and getting outside and the NFL's Play 60 program, just messaging like that is going to be so important for the development of the young individuals of this country. So we will. There's just going to be a lot of really interesting things that come out of this. Sure, it's great to see that we're in the middle of an evolution right now, and we're officially in a digital age, and it's exciting personally for my business and the impacts that it has. But I think we need to be careful about the impacts that it has on us all as human beings, and make sure that we don't lose touch with what it means to connect with each other in a meaningful way. So I don't know how brands necessarily capitalize on that the right way, but I think the next couple years are going to be post-COVID crazy for how it's handled the right way and who does it right. It's going to be fun.
Agree. Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions. One is a very short question for Steve Lacroix, I believe. He hasn't mentioned which Steve. Are you looking at increasing value from clubs during these times, or at reducing the sponsored amount? That's one question.
Well, to be honest, ideally, sponsors maintain their spends, and just a matter of what makes up to justify that spend that's been committed contractually. New discussions on new partners is a totally different process at this point, just because we don't necessarily know what all assets may or may not be there. But current partners are a priority to try to keep the financials at the same level that they are ideally. And if not, then how can you either carry a credit forward or worst case refund money back, or it depends if they paid their invoice. All those are different timing as well. So it's a balancing act for sure. And again, it's just each partner has a little different process to how they want to handle it.
Interesting. There's one more interesting question actually. With no fans, there is an additional space in the stadium for bigger and better sponsorship branding. What role does this additional space play in the overall scheme of sponsorship benefits? Does this in any way dilute the need for digital sponsorship activation? So maybe Steve Busby, you could, or maybe Steve Lacroix, you can start, and maybe Steve Busby, you can add on this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We need to know from the league perspective of what we are allowed to add. Field signage is not allowed in NFL venues, and so it is allowed in other sports. You see it obviously across not just the United States, but throughout the world as far as field level type signage. So those discussions are going on at the league level, and our owners will be involved. And a lot of that is to protect the broadcast partners. The TV contracts are a significant revenue source for our league, and they obviously sell advertising to their broadcasts and exclusivities and so forth. So it's another one of the juggling balancing acts between league and their partners and broadcast partners, and then us and our local partners.
Interesting. Steve Busby?
Yeah, look, there's an argument to be made about over branding anything, right? If the entire stands are now a logo slap, that's probably going to be, I don't know that would be good for the fan base, but there is an idea kind of forming. Again, like Steve, I would love to connect in a couple of weeks as things shake out here and hear how this all plays out. But if there was like a way you could have almost like a digital tarp over the seats and put fans like on FaceTime and have their faces on the TV, so it seems like there's at least a wave of people out there, and then that could be sponsored content brought to you by Apple, whoever, somebody that does that digital interaction point. That could be a really, really cool brand integration. I think something like that would make sense, would fit, but if there was a brand slap or a logo slap for somebody that made absolutely no sense, that was covering the seats in the stands, that could do some harm. So I don't know how it all play out, but just over branding is a thing.
The other element to that is the cost of doing that in the stands, right? So we don't know if the regular season returns for house full next season, then the investment made on those things would again be like it might go waste, right? I think if you cannot use it in the future. So again, there's going to be interesting, like you said, there's an interesting debate over branding versus the cost of bringing those initiatives. But again, it's interesting to see how the teams and leagues are going to react to this situation and come up with ideas.
I would think that has to be a significant spend to sell something like that, So it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, that'd be significant with a capital S. I mean, it's you look into it if you're trying to cover 66,000 seats and 7 different levels, and it can add up very quickly as far as that goes. And then to your point, it may not be an asset that you need in the future.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're trying to balance it, the spend and the revenue and the future, and every venue is differently. The structure is different, so it's not like you can, send your banners over to Chicago or Green Bay the following weekend and they use them. So it's all customized, and their partners are different than ours. Colors are different than ours. So like you said, Steve, let's connect in a couple of weeks, because it could be an interesting decision process as we come down the pike here.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we have about 9 minutes left. We'll take 2 more questions. There are a couple of questions that I see on the panel. Maybe this one I'll go first, and Blake and Arvind, you could join in on this one. In sports which are low key, and they have given an example of archery in India, where we barely have any sponsors. How would we maintain the current interest in sponsors vis-a-vis getting new ones, especially when there is any digital content available? And how do we get interest in individual athletes from sponsor standpoint?
Is Satish going, or
you can go first, Blake, and maybe Arvind can join in.
Okay, Arvind, got it. Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that, again, there's assets and content there. So it does, from a size standpoint, understand that maybe they're a little more grassroots, and they don't have they don't attract the audience that some other properties may. But there are really cost-effective ways to tap into the content that you do have, and it's really some interesting things that could happen, and it forces innovation. And I think that's the key here. So if you don't have maybe the audience size or some of the budgets, you have to be more innovative in your approach. And there's some different things that you can do that I think, without knowing the sport specifically, but there are different things that those properties can do that, maybe others wouldn't even consider, that are really, really unique, novel, and attract the audience in a different way, that become really compelling for a brand to integrate. Whether that's, there's been a lot of talk lately of more access to athletes, and really taking people kind of behind the curtain, whether that's miking up athletes or doing those types of things. There's a lot that you can do there, and as you sort of go down the pecking order of sports properties, the ones that really, again, are a bit more grassroots and are forced to innovate, come up with some of the most interesting ideas sometimes. And you've seen that throughout the history of sports. And the best ideas kind of bubble their way up to the top when you see the other major properties start to look at some of those things. So I have no doubt that there's innovations and opportunities that are out there, but you've really got to be creative and figure out entry points that can make some sense for sponsors. And again, it doesn't matter if it's you're not talking about the biggest properties in the world. I think some of these smaller brands and properties out there, there's a way to integrate them in a real interesting way.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yep, I agreed. And the 2 main aspects around that will be the innovation and the creativity, right? Again, it starts from the sporting organization, right? It need not be the things that the sponsors will basically want to be the initiator in the process. So the sports organizations will have to be cognizant, right, and come up with a few different strategies. Innovation is going to play a big role here, right? Because you will obviously have to entice the sponsors, right, and give them something from a value standpoint, right, and creative aspects are going to be the primary driving force, right, with innovation. So the best way to approach is, hey, can I come up with some creatives, right, that I can basically go and pitch to the sponsors and get them on board. With this in this time, right, there is also the concept of the goodwillness, right, that a lot of these sponsors are looking for. especially like promoting, say, from that angle, right? So there is more sponsors that are out there who are willing to listen to some of these newer ideas, right? So the initiative, I mean, at least from my perspective, should also like come from the sports organizations, right? And clearly like lay out a strategy around, hey, how can I innovate? How can I come up with creative pieces, right? And I can take that and pitch to the different sponsors. And certainly there are a lot more sponsors who are willing to listen at this point in time.
Interesting. Okay, so one last question, and this is something which we had in our question bank, and this is obviously an open question to the panel and something which we wanted to ask. What innovations can we see in creating virtual stadiums for the fans? So who wants to go first? Steve, you want to go first?
Yeah. Steve L.
Yeah, Steve L.
Yeah, I think it's, if fans are not going to be allowed in the stadium, how can you then bring some of those in stadium, in our case, in stadium or in arena with other sports or in venue traditions and there's a lot of unique things that happen when you're at an NFL game, especially at a Vikings game at US Bank Stadium. How can we replicate some of that at home? We have the Skol chant, we blow the gavel horn, we've got certain music, our fight song that we play after touchdowns and end zone celebrations by the players can be viewed, but so it's just one of those where, there's how can you scale it up and bring it home through a second device versus the national broadcast. And so those are a lot of things that we're talking about, considering. And again, once we know what we can and can't do and what our destiny is for a season, then we can pivot accordingly. But it's just kind of fun to think about how you can bring some of that in stadium experience to your couch or home.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Steve,
I think.
Oh, sorry, Satish.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just quickly add to that. Right? I'm thinking to Steve's point, right? I think there's going to be more man caves built, and more household spend on couches and other things, gadgets. So it'll be interesting to see if digital can be infused in that experience, so that the teams can bring the action closer to the fans, like, for example, augmented reality or something like that, which takes them closer to the action, how the players are warming up before getting into the field. A lot of things like that, and then probably fans can record their emotions and expressions, and which can be broadcasted into the TV. So things like that, it is more exciting. Again, I'm talking from a fan perspective, from a technology perspective, from a digital perspective, how you are taking the game to the couches of or the basements of the man caves of the fans, right? I feel like digital is going to create it. And guess what? Just like how the kids these days are going to be used to the wearing masks, the younger generation fans are going to be used to digital as the way they would interact with sports. That's going to set the tone for the future generations of sports fans.
If Lazy Boy doesn't buy a fan seat promotion this season, I'm applying for their CMO job.
One last thing on that. I think the other thing is you've really got your people consume content very differently. We all talk about this younger audience now, which is it's not as young as some people think, but it certainly is an attractive demographic on Twitch that really scales a broader age group than people realize. But that's how people consume content right now. And if there are different ways that you can look at delivering content, sort of that Homer broadcast type, where you can get the comfort of being with like-minded people cheering for your team and share that experience and comment on that experience, make it kind of a more interactive thing, which you would get in the stadium. Those are the things that I think are going to happen going forward.
Like, that's an amazing idea. I mean, I think even just to take, like, how often do you get to watch the game right now with people that you went to college with, right? You're all living in different parts of the country. At least historically, that hasn't been something people have really thought about doing. We're not going to hop on a Zoom to watch the game, but now it almost seems normal. So you could collect your college buddies to watch your team play that were a fan for the first time since you graduated, and I think that's a really interesting point and something that could be capitalized on for sure.
Interesting. Arvind, your closing comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, innovation is probably is the centerpiece, right, of all these discussions. So again, to Steve's point and even Satish's point, right? So how can the sports organizations take those unique moments, right, and sort of mix that with the fan experiences at the end of the day, right? That's going to define, say, how the sports in general will be consumed moving forward. Because all these fans, right, they're loyal, right? They have ritual, right? So now you're looking at virtual things happening. So it's going to be interesting, say, how the sports organizations open up, right, and sort of take those digital unique experiences and infuse that into whether it's their broadcasting, right, or promoting that within their social media platforms. So there's going to be a lot of augmented reality, a lot of virtual reality, a lot of gamifying those kind of experiences that are going to happen in the future, and probably that's the next kind of way that we're going to see, and that should be I think that is more along the lines of how the sports content in general will be consumed, right? And sort of like bridging that gap, right, between the sports organizations and fans themselves.
Yes, interesting. I think that's one point which even somebody raised in a question or a comment about, the coexistence of both and, consuming content in that kind of way wherein AR and VR comes into play, and, esports and traditional sports can kind of go hand in hand. So great, amazing. So, I mean, unless anybody has any other points, I think it's pretty much time. And I think we did well on time. It's bang 1 hour. And thank you, everybody, for all your lovely comments, and thanks to the audience for participation. And I think the questions were brilliant, and I think all the panelists loved answering those as well. And we would be just sending you a short survey after this webinar, and it just takes 2 minutes time to kind of answer that. It has 4 questions, and we would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Once again, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we just hope that the pandemic gets over and we are back to the new normal, as they say it so. And we hope to see some live sports in action. Thank you very much once again.
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks.